Okay. Right.
Fumi and Matt.
Okay.
Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much to Robin and Matt for organizing. So we are between the dinner. So dinner and at the end of the sort of session, so I'll be quick. So this is about policy engagement, and also it will build on Neil's talk on technology adoption to some extent. So hopefully it will create some sort of synergy with the earlier talks and sessions. So this session is called Tools, Strategies and Critiques of Foresight. So it is about future, and we are embedding our work in a local policy context, and I like to throw place in this thinking. Right, so I'm going to do the very quick intro. So we are talking about place-based strategic intelligence for policy change. So to do that, we've done a mapping exercise, and we've created some framework, conceptual framework. So what we are trying to do is to contribute some conceptual development of foresight in the context of city region, which Matt will illustrate in the later part of the talk. So just, I'm going to tell you why we are doing it. So some imperatives. First, city region are getting more and more important in the policy landscape. That will create extra layer of the multi-level governance. So we are dealing with vertical connections and also horizontal connections and all these frustrating communications with various actors, including public actors and private ones. And people talk about strategic intelligence vacuum, particularly in the city regions, because of its newness and also in the being the middle point. And in England, there's, local enterprise partnership and things, and in Scotland, the Scottish government, of course, and then city region context or growth, inclusive growth deals, city region deals are appearing. So there's a new complexity out there. And we are drawing on some economic geography literature, which I kind of tend to associate with. So we're drawing on Marcus Glilich and Mark Strata's work on the agency and regional opportunity space. So what they're basically talking about is to make the future, it's not only the history, so there's a past dependence of the region. To make the regional growth, you have to be aware of the history, what the past dependencies are, existing industry, existing capacity, but also perceived future matters. So they call it opportunity space. But to get to the opportunity space, you've got to have the right time, right place, and right ingredients, including the actors. So we are sort of setting the scene using that opportunity space concept. And as everyone has talked about today, there's technological changes, transformation, including AI and data-driven innovation, specifically in the Edinburgh and South East Scotland context, which we are looking at. Okay, then, critique of foresight. Foresight is quite a broad thing, so we're not really going into the detail, of course, today, but we just wanted to combine some innovation studies insights to foresight. There's lots of kind of conversation going on, but it looks as if foresight literature is kind of following up what innovation studies has done. So, drawing on Matt's work during his PhD, we've combined these innovation studies and sort of foresight framework, in particular looking at different systems of innovation, so sector innovations, and also geographical, national, regional, local, or city, region, whatever levels of sort of systems of innovation in our context, and also looking at innovation intermediaries as a strategic actor in this landscape. So bringing foresight literature, economic geography literature, and innovation studies together. So that's where we come from as a kind of conceptual background. Sorry for the bit sort of boring introduction, but we wanted to add a little bit sort of spice. I mean, foresight is great in a number of things, in numbers of theories and ideas, but also in practice we should be aware that it's always a political choice. Who's going to be involved in strategic intermediation, co-production knowledge? It's great, but there is a consequence of who's involved in, and there is a distributed effect of who's in it, who's not in it. Right, so I'm going to skip this one. So just in terms of the foresight, what we have done is a very early stage of foresight exercise, if you could just sort of summarize in a very, very sort of simple way. So in terms of analysis, before all this opportunity scanning, foresight road mapping exercise take place, how do we conceptualize what's going on, technological change, how data-driven innovation is coming, who's going to discover this opportunity. So we wanted to sort of set the scene by involving different actors and engaging with particularly local policy communities, public sector, civil servants, and local businesses, plus communities. So there's a lot to deal with, and we started off with a few local authority areas. So what did we do? We aimed to design and develop a future visioning tool, which we call Opportunity Areas Analysis Tool, OAT, and also we tried to ensure equivalence. We heard the word equivalence earlier today. How we're going to include equivalence in our vision making and also make the reflective nature in it. Right, so opportunity area is our kind of key term, and to reach opportunity space, we have to mobilize opportunity areas. So in terms of the analytical concept, we have three key terms: trends, capabilities, and capacity, and Mats will talk about it more in the next slide also. And we wanted to ensure that there is a connectivity alignment in terms of the spatial ecosystems and also sectoral capabilities. And then we wanted to look at the local connections and, of course, extra local connections in our intelligence building future visioning exercise. So we've got a sort of a few analytical help from various colleagues, and I think at this point I'll pass over to Mats. Yep, thank you. Sorry, a single word. Thank you.
Right, so indeed, so again, this is not necessarily new. It's things like multi-level perspective and ecosystem research and practice program devised by, amongst other, Ben Spiegel, who is, as Fumi said, our good colleague in the business school. But effectively what it's sort of a summary of what this actually does, is it creates an important implication that effectively to understand emerging technology and technological transition and socio-technical transition, specifically if you're going to down health sort of route, you need to understand the mapping of various sort of dimensions of technology change, right? And those dimensions roughly correspond to something that we then later distill down to these three things, and they have a lot of resonance with things like health and etc. But there are also a perhaps more sort of policy-oriented terms, and they explain things and they create a framework for producing such mapping and such alignment using terms that are perhaps more common amongst practitioners, rather than things like socio-technical regimes, which try and explain socio-technical regime to local authority officials, and well, have fun anyways. So we've mapped these sort of three levels. On top, things that would kind of correspond to things that we refer to, things like landscape changes and kind of broad shifts in sort of these days sustainable development. We've heard from Arno earlier, or any of the grand societal challenges, etc. We'd map those as trends. And the reflection of those trends in local economic development is found in sort of policy documents, sort of all sorts of kind of interaction with kind of key stakeholders, etc. Then there's capabilities. This is effectively an inventory of economic and research sort of facilities and resources available in a place, as Fumi said, and this place can be defined as a region, or it can be defined as a local authority area, or it can be defined as a town. It depends again what we're working with. And then at the bottom, sort of the niche level, if you follow the kind of the health taxonomy, we talk about things called capacities. So the actual ability to mobilize resources towards an innovation project or towards some kind of a transformative change journey, right? And these are really evidenced as, there's an actual building built, or there's a research project, a program going on. And of course, there's a bit of a negotiation what counts and what doesn't count. And you need to kind of go through sifting both either through data as well as through qualitative validation with stakeholders as to where people find useful pockets of alignment. So we've done this on a number of studies, and there's one coming up again soon. So we've developed and deployed this methodology through 2 studies already. One in Five and one in Scottish Borders, and both are within the DDI. So the Data Driven Innovation Programme, which I'm sure you're all aware of, is this big university, well, not just university, government investment in university as well as other infrastructure to do with supporting data-driven innovation in the Edinburgh City region, and we've also recently written up about this in a paper in Regional Studies. So that's kind of the report, what we're kind of reporting on, and this is all publicly available, so you can go and look into some of the details. But what these studies basically demonstrate is just, as Fumi said, there's these sort of multiple layers of political complexity, because in the Scottish context you have the UK government bringing some of the money in, some of the innovation policy in. The Scottish government is doing the other thing. Then regional economic partnerships, which kind of emerge as these sort of city-region deals, have their own agenda and have their own sort of priorities, and then local authorities individually are kind of doing their own thing as well. Now, across the sort of southeast Scotland, they've been framed as part of this city region deal, of which the Data Driven Innovation Programme is a part of. But the challenge is that, especially from outside the city of Edinburgh, the traction for any of this transformative innovation is relatively low, right? And through a series of these studies, what we try to do is to try and see, okay, so can an intervention like this, can a framework like this actually enable the development of strategic foresight that can, bring about useful new partnerships or new projects that would extend the reach of data-driven innovation beyond the city. So what have we actually found? Well, we've done, as I said, 2 studies. One was in Fife, and of course there's really kind of just a big difference between the 2 geographical areas. Borders is kind of, both of them are basically largely farmland, but Fife has a much stronger industrial base along the north coast of Firth of Forth, with things like Rosyth, Babcock, aircraft carriers are built there, right? So there's quite a huge industrial base. Whereas Scottish Borders is really kind of agricultural country, very, very dispersed. Both have challenging demographic situation with an aging population, people moving out of the region. And in the Scottish Borders, there's also there's lack of any kind of detectable industrial base, and there's also less engagement from the university, right? No big money, no university. There are projects there. Not to say there's no university, but big universities like Edinburgh see less of Scottish Borders than they would see at Five, because in Five we have partners that you can kind of invest in because they're big. In Scottish Borders, not so much. So we basically tried to look and see what a framework like this would look like, and we identified these 5 areas with stakeholders using this framework. And by the way, very important to mention, the 5 studies were actually done together with Alessandro Rosiello and Oves Golra, who I'm sure you all know are also kind of close colleagues and friends in ISSTI family. These are just kind of like little illustrations we threw in, and this is basically my silliness. But the point of these sort of graphs, or just the way that you put things together, which is kind of illustrating a little point that the OOT framework has overall, is the idea that the intervention of mapping is effective, trying to bring different categories of data into focus in a really kind of concrete and specific way. By and large, what we really were able to do, in a sense, was produce labels that significant critical mass of local policymakers and small enterprises and researchers, where that was possible, were able to identify with And those became kind of starting points for conversations around developing projects and solutions. And they were different, right? In 5, as I say, big industrial days, you know, the whole purpose of the intervention is to link up anchor institutions, whereas in Scottish Borders, it's a much more bottom-up sort of entrepreneurship approach, where development of place actually means bringing the intermediaries that are able to upskill the entrepreneurial scene and actually enable them to tap into any of these opportunities that are coming up. So we then built some little models that kind of explain how you might do that, how might you bring institutions together, how might you re-energize the ecosystem. We don't have that much time to talk about this, so I'm just going to skip through. And I'm going to basically come up with just to sort of summarize and lead us into maybe a very short discussion with you know, a couple of further observations. So on one hand, right, the thing that's sort of really missing from this is what happens before you deploy any such tool. And that is, you know, we talk about inclusive growth. In fact, one of the complexities, added complexities on top of everything else working with the Scottish Borders was the Scottish Borders is actually in 2 city region deals, and the other one is called the Inclusive Growth Deal, and it's across the borderlands. So it's half of it's in Scotland, the other half is actually in Northern England. And so they had, you know, a whole set of competing priorities and kind of going like, well, we've got this bit doing that, we've got this deal doing that, how do we actually marry things up? And to start that is, well, how do we actually know which stakeholders are relevant for which deal, for which part of the bid, for which part of the ecosystem? So that's an obvious, not necessarily flaw, but an obviously sort of open question. How do you actually go about identifying who goes in? There's also been radical changes in ways sort of opportunity spaces are constructed post-COVID, right? So the second study, the Scottish Borders study, was done sort of in this kind of COVID-ish period, right, 2020, where, you know, things were opening up, things were looking like COVID was a 6-month thing, right? But then it turned out not to be a 6-month thing. And now it's very clear that some of the ways in which local place is constructed is increasingly digitally mediated, and we are thinking about how can a tool like this account for the fact that things are, you know, plugged into the World Wide Web ever so more. And then, I mean, maybe Fumi wants to say something a little bit about expectations and governance, because that's a little bit more her field than mine. But the various policy actors, for instance, and their roles has been one of the interesting, interesting observations on these studies, and it's definitely something that I guess from research point of view is where the interesting mapping is, because this mapping, as I said, is more of a tool to generate foresight, whereas for us, I think the interesting thing is figuring out how does it feature within these other processes of foresight. That's us.
Fantastic fast journey. Thank you very much.
Well, we had 45 seconds, so we did it in 45 seconds.
To pack their bags and leave